We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
Nosotros crecemos cuando damos.
We grow when we give.
Давайте, и дастся вам.
与えるとき成長する.
We grow when we give.
Welcome to R.O.G, Return on Generosity. I'm your host, Shannon Cassidy. This podcast celebrates generosity at work, not financial giving valuable time, mutual respect, alternative perspectives, and genuine collaboration. Our special guest today is Kim Scott, the author of Radical Respect and Radical Candor, and co-host of the Radical Candor and Radical Respect podcasts. Kim's first R.O.G episode is number 142, and this episode is focused on the re-release of her book, Radical Respect. Drawing from her extensive experience and candid anecdotes from her career, Kim presents a powerful framework designed to identify and address obstacles to collaboration and respect in professional settings. Kim was the CEO, coach at Dropbox, Qualtrics, Twitter, and other tech companies. She was a member of the faculty at Apple University, and before that led AdSense, YouTube, DoubleClick teams at Google. Prior to that, Kim managed a pediatric clinic in Kosovo and started a diamond cutting factory in Moscow. Not your average person. What I appreciate most about you, Kim, is your activism. You channel your wisdom and experience in ways that really enable us to grow beside and behind you. Welcome back to R.O.G, Kim.
Thank you so much. I loved our last conversation, and I've been looking forward to this one all week.
Oh, good. Me too. And this book is incredible. Would love for you to share with our listeners why the Radical Respect book needed to come out.
Yeah. Well, if you write a book about feedback, as I did when I wrote Radical Candor, you're going to get a lot of it. And indeed, I did. And the best feedback I got came from a friend of mine who had invited me to give a talk at a company where she was CEO. And she and I have been colleagues for the better part of a decade. She's a person I like and respect enormously, and she's one of too few Black women CEOs in tech or in any other sector for that matter. So I was really excited to go and talk with her team. When I finished giving the Radical Candor talk, she pulled me aside and she said, "Kim, I'm excited to roll out Radical Candor. I think it's going to help me build the kind of innovative culture I want. But I got to tell you, it's much harder for me than it is for you." And she went on to explain to me that as soon as she would offer people even the most gentle, compassionate criticism, they would call her an angry Black woman. And as soon as she said this, I knew it was true. And it made me have 4 realizations at the same time. And these 4 realizations are what prompted me to write Radical Respect. The first thing I realized was that I had not been the kind of colleague that I want to be, that I imagine myself to be. I had failed even to notice the extent to which she had to show up unfailingly cheerful and pleasant in every meeting we were ever in together, even though she had what to be pissed off about at work, as we all do from time to time. But she wasn't able to give that voice. And it just hadn't occurred to me the toll that must take on her because I hadn't even noticed. And because I hadn't noticed, I had not intervened in the way that I would like to imagine that I would have intervened. Mm-hmm. So that was realization number 1. The second thing that I realized was that I had also, not only had I been in denial about what was happening to her as a Black woman in the workplace, I had also been in denial about the kinds of things that happened to me as a white woman in the workplace. I had pretended that a whole host of things were not happening that were in fact happening. Kind of hard for the author of a book called Radical Candor to admit, but there it is. And I think the reason why I had been in denial is that I never wanted to think of myself as a victim. But even less than wanting to think of myself as a victim, did I want to think of myself as a culprit. And that brings me to my third realization, was that I had been most deeply in denial about the times when I had been disrespectful to my colleagues, when my attitudes and behaviors were problematic. And so I couldn't acknowledge them and make amends for them. Because I had pretended I hadn't done what I had done. And then the fourth thing I realized was that as a leader, I sort of imagined that I was creating these BS-free zones where everybody could do the best work of their life and enjoy working together. But by pretending that bias, prejudice, and bullying and other problematic attitudes and behaviors were not showing up, I had failed to build the kind of environments as a leader that I wanted to build. So that was a big moment for me. And that was what made me sit down and spend the next 4 years writing Radical Respect.
Thank you for that background. That's so helpful. And what a great, this is what I mean about your activism. You know, I know you as an author and now as a friend, and you're the kind of person who has those realizations, and rather than just bury them or cover them up or justify them, you think, I'm going to out myself and I'm going to, create a framework, and I'm going to help other people who inevitably are dealing with these same things. I found it remarkably relatable. I'm sure every human being does, because these are human things. Right?
Yes, this is all part of our human journey is figuring out how to do better on these topics.
For sure. So you famously create these 2x2s, 2 over 2s.
Yes, I love a good 2x2.
Yeah, it's such a great way to say, where am I on this continuum?
Yeah.
So what is the framework here for Radical Respect?
So the Radical Respect framework sort of shows what happens in a kind of environment where we're optimizing for collaboration, not coercion, and where we are honoring everyone's individuality rather than demanding conformity. And it's sort of puzzling about why radical respect doesn't always happen. Because I have never met anyone who says, I am really dying to work in a coercive work environment. And I also have really not met any leaders who set out, I'm sure there are some, but I have never met a leader who set out intentionally to create a coercive work environment. Because the vast majority of leaders realize that is not going to create the kind of innovative work environment that they need in order to succeed. And I also have literally never met anyone who said, what I really want is a 1984 style, everybody marching in lockstep, big brother kind of environment that's demanding conformity. We all imagine that our own individuality will be respected and honored, and that we are honoring other people's individuality. And yet we do demand conformity without often even realizing it. And that's what those are that sort of explaining the benefits of radical respect and also what gets in the way of it is what I set out to do in this book, and what we can do to get it back out of the way.
And what do you mean by the conformity?
Yeah, I mean, a random and sort of funny example from my career. I one time had to go, when I was working at Google, I had to give a presentation to the founders and the CEO. And before I went in, I was wearing a pink sweater. And somebody said, oh, you got to take off the pink sweater. I'm like, what? So they don't notice that I'm a woman? Like, what the hell are you talking about? But I don't think I think this person thought they were giving me good advice. And I don't think they wanted to demand conformity. And I also don't think that the founders or the CEO minded that I was a woman. I mean, they had hired me. But that's an example of the ways in which we begin to demand conformity. Another example comes from and usually it's unconscious bias that, we're expecting people to behave a certain way. Sometimes the way that people demand that we are professional, it demands conformity. I mean, I think that word professional, or sometimes when people talk about you need to improve your executive presence, they're demanding a certain conformity. So I was working with a CEO who realized that they didn't have any women on the executive team. And he knew that this was probably a problem with their promotion process, not with the women at the company. And so he asked me to sit in on a promotion meeting and sort of let folks know if I noticed a problem. There were 2 people up for promotion, a man and a woman. And they both were achieving incredible results. They were much beloved by their teams. They were both really great leaders. And when they talked about the man, they talked about him being a great leader. And then when they started talking about the woman who was up for promotion, somebody referred to her as a real mother hen. And I'm like, all right, back the train up. Here we go. And so I think very, and at first they were a little defensive. Oh, Kim, it doesn't mean anything. I'm like, come on, get real. Who are you going to promote? The great leader or the mother hen? Words matter. The way that we talk about people really matters.
Oh, for sure. And so that's one side of the continuum. The other side is to respect individuality. So tell me more about that. What does that look like?
Yeah, the way that we move away from demanding conformity and towards respecting individuality. So that's the sort of the horizontal line on the 2x2 is we need to be able to recognize bias and prejudice when they happen. And we need to be able to disrupt them when they happen. And we need to learn how to do that sort of in our conversations, but also with our management systems.
Okay. So how do we do that? What are some of the the hows?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me back up. Bias, prejudice, and bullying are three different attitudes and behaviors that are going to get in the way on our journey to radical respect. And so one of the first things I think that we need to do is we need to tease these three things apart. I think very often we conflate, and we talked about this last time, we conflate bias, prejudice, and bullying as though they're the same thing. And because we got to respond to different problems differently. And sometimes it feels like sort of this monolithic mess. And so breaking a problem that seems big into its component parts can help us solve the problem. That's kind of the goal. And so I'm going to remind folks what these simple definitions for bias, prejudice, and bullying were. Bias is not meaning it. It's usually unconscious, whereas prejudice is meaning it. It's very consciously held belief, usually incorporating some kind of unfair and inaccurate stereotype. And bullying is just being mean. So what can we do about bias? What can we do in the moment? I recommend for bias an I statement. Whereas if it's prejudice, you need an it statement. And if it's bullying, you need a you statement. So let me tell you some stories to kind of explain what I mean by I, it, and you. One of my favorite stories about bias comes from a colleague of mine who started a venture capital firm. She went into a meeting with two colleagues who were men. And she sat down at the center of the table because she had the expertise that was going to win her team the deal. And then her two colleagues who were men sat to her left. And the first person came in and sat across from the guy to her left. The next person came in and sat across from the guy to his left. And then everybody else filed on down the table, leaving her dangling by herself. That's sometimes how bias shows up, who decides to sit near whom. And when she started talking, and the other side had questions, they kept directing their questions at her two colleagues who were men, not at her. Ever notice that happen, Shannon? Yes. That's often how bias shows up. It happened once, it happened twice, it happened a third time.
Yeah,
and the third time it happened, one of her colleagues stood up and he said, I think we should just switch seats. That's an example of an I statement. It sort of like held up a mirror to everyone in the room. They realized what they were doing and they knocked it off. They stopped doing it. And he did that in part because he liked her. He didn't like seeing her get ignored. So there's kind of an emotional, almost a moral side to this. And then he also did it. There's a practical side to it as well. He did it because he just wanted to win the deal. And he knew if the other side wouldn't listen to her, they wouldn't win the deal. And there's also an efficiency side to this. He also realized it was going to be easier for the other folks to hear it from him than to hear it from her. Certainly, he didn't think she couldn't speak up for herself, but it was easier for him to hold up the mirror and faster than for her to do it. So he did it. So that's an example of using an I statement to disrupt bias. However, that almost never happens. Like that story is so simple and yet rare. It's sort of uncommon sense, I would say, this guy had. And so what can leaders do to make it more likely that that kind of upstanding will happen more often? And I think if a leader can sit down with their team and take 3 steps, it'll really help bias get disrupted more often. First step is to come up with a shared vocabulary. I think it's important not to dictate words to your team, but rather to ask them, what's the word or phrase? What's the I statement? And I statement sort of invites other people in to notice bias. What's the I statement that we will use in order to in order to disrupt bias when we notice it? Some teams I've worked with like to say, I don't think you meant that the way it sounded. I like to wave a purple flag. It's a friendly purple flag, not a red flag, not a yellow flag, but it's sort of a visual I statement. Other teams like to borrow language from Daniel Kahneman, whatever it takes. Like figure out what are the words that your team can agree to use. One team I worked with said, yo. Another team said, not cool. Another team had a cat theme going on. They would meow at each other, whatever it is. Like try to introduce a little, bias is a big deal. I don't mean to make light of it, but sometimes introducing a little bit of levity into the situation is makes it more likely that people will actually disrupt the bias. So that's number 1, shared vocabulary. So step number 2 is to really have a shared norm for how to respond when it's you who has said or done the bias thing, because it's going to be all of us. We all have biases. And yet, I don't know about you, Shannon, but for me, when someone points out that I've said or done something biased, I feel incredibly ashamed. And when I'm in shame brain, my lizard brain is in charge and my executive function has shut down. And so the shared norm can help us re-engage that executive function so that we respond well and not badly. And this is a really important point, because when one feels ashamed, one tends to be defensive. And it is not the job of the other person to prevent me from feeling defensive. It's my job to manage my own defensiveness, my own shame. So helping people learn how to say, thank you for pointing it out. Like even just that, like in general, I don't believe in scripts, but thank you for pointing it out is a good thing to say. Now there's one of 2 things that happens next. Either I get it and I'll work on not doing it again. And work on is really important, because just because you tell me to that something I have been in the habit of saying or doing since I was a child is problematic doesn't mean I'm going to be able to stop doing it. I need you to be patient with me, but also I need to be persistent in my efforts to stop doing it. So thank you for pointing it out. I get it. I'm working on it. Or thank you for pointing it out. I don't get it. And that second thing is really hard to say, because at least for me, when I'm in a situation where someone points out to me that something I said or did is biased, but I don't quite know why, I'm doubly ashamed. I'm ashamed because I've harmed someone, and I'm ashamed because I'm ignorant. Like that's hard. And so helping people to get comfortable with being in that situation so that we can learn is really important. So now that's the first 2 steps. Shared vocabulary, shared norm. Step number 3 is a shared commitment to actually doing this, because even when a team agrees that this is a great idea, this is a hard thing to do. So we really got to make sure that we're coming up with a way to hold ourselves accountable for disrupting bias. And that requires leadership, ideally from the leader of the team, but someone on the team needs to step up and really own this.
How does that happen, Kim, in your experience? Because I think without this, I would call it like formal process or way of understanding how to deal with that, we just hope that people are going to step into that void, and they're generally not. So
yeah, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Yes, that is the truth. We do need this. I think this is where leadership is really important. I think if the leader of the team can introduce this and then ask people to disrupt their bias, make themselves the lead by example, and really demand that people disrupt their bias. If you get to an end of a meeting and nobody has flagged any bias, then pause and say, what did we miss in this meeting? What did I say that was biased? Because I know there's something. Another thing a leader can do is can bring somebody in from the outside. The way the CEO I was working with did with me, he said, you come to the meeting and look for the bias. And I was being paid to look for it, so I looked for it. There was no, I was in no way afraid of pointing it out. In fact, he had brought me in to do that. So I think that was I admire that. I think sort of having someone who is an external bias buster can be very helpful. I think also another CEO who I worked with was working on not standing up in front of the whole company and saying, you guys, instead saying you all, because there were some women at the company who said they felt excluded when he did that. And when he referred to everybody as you guys, there were other women who didn't mind, but he wanted to appeal to all the women at the company. And so he was working on learning to say you all instead of you guys, which did not fall trippingly from his tongue.
Mm-hmm. That's so important because I think we just don't know, like even addressing a population of people and referring to them as ladies and gentlemen, right? That's binary. And
and a lot of women don't like the word ladies, and a lot of men don't like the word gentlemen, and vice versa. And it's fair, and it excludes all the non-binary folks in the room.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot, but this is a habit, and it feels very innocuous to people. And that's it's kind of a hard situation where you're doing something, you don't have any bad intentions, you have no imagination that what you're doing is actually really landing in a way for somebody that's very hard. It's so tempting to be defensive and to dismiss that. But it's so important if we want to create these kinds of environments that don't demand conformity, that in fact honor everyone's individuality. It's important to learn to listen to that feedback. But it's hard. I'm not going to pretend like it's easy.
Yes. And the way you're describing this is like there's this situation, you're willing to give the feedback, and then you're also talking about how to receive the feedback, to say, thank you for pointing that out. I either get it or I don't get it. But what happens when we have the bravery to point it out to someone, say our boss or even a peer, and they find that offensive? They think that, we are, too woke, or we're too, making a big deal out of nothing, that kind of thing. Well, how can we handle that?
I think a couple of things. One, I don't think that disrupting bias is exactly feedback. I try to think about it like a correction, like a typo on a page. Like we all make typos. I'm not saying, you do sloppy work. I'm just saying there's a typo on page 6. I think about disrupting bias. It's also a little bit like, my son plays baseball, and if he's running from first to second and about to get thrown out, somebody needs to yell back. You don't want to tell him after the fact, after he's been. And so I think that disrupting bias is really important because bias is a pattern. And if we don't publicly correct it, then we reinforce it. We make it more likely that it's going to happen again. So what you were asking is, what do you do if you flag the bias and the other person gets angry at you? So this is also part of the reason why it's important for leaders to get the team to agree to this bias disruption process, because that makes it much less likely that people will get angry when they're now on notice that they should expect to have their bias disrupted. But what happens if you're in a situation with a leader who has not created this bias disruption process and who doesn't welcome it? So I go and I say, I really don't like it when you refer to me as a girl. To me, it's like, the wrong answer on the SAT. It's man, woman, girl, boy, and so if you don't want me to call you a boy, don't call me a girl. And sometimes I've been told when I've said that, other women don't mind when I call them girls. In fact, they prefer it. And my response in that case is, well, you're not talking to other women right now. You're talking to me. You know, I think also reminding people that everyone has a red word. Like everyone, there are certain words in certain cultures which have experienced some form of bias that are really painful to them. And that if you say those words, they're not going to hear anything else. And in fact, I was working with a team they were mostly men. And for them, that word was asshole because they felt like they had been so unjustly accused of being assholes that you couldn't use the word anymore. And I respected that. Like I understood where they were coming from. So I think it's really important to remember to acknowledge that, I know you didn't intend. I know your intentions are good. Yeah. And to me, what matters is not so much your intentions as the impact that your words have on me. And sometimes it's useful to think about it. Like if somebody came and stepped on your toe and you said, you're stepping on my toe, you wouldn't expect them to get defensive and to insist on their right. I didn't mean to step on your toe. Like you expect them just to get off your damn toe, right? And so trying to draw that kind of analogy, like let's not imagine this is about language. Let's imagine you're stepping on my toe. You're not going to stand there and tell me about how good your intentions were. You're just going to get off my toe and say, I'm sorry. Like it should be that simple.
Yeah. Oh, I so appreciate that. That's a really good I statement. So when we witness prejudice, you recommend that we have an it response
statement.
Yeah.
Yes.
How do we do that?
So an I statement's not going to work if it's prejudice, because an I statement sort of holds a mirror up to the other person. And if you do that in the case of prejudice, the other person's going to grin in the mirror. They're going to like what they see because they believe that thing, right? It's consciously held belief. So in the case of prejudice, you want an it statement. And an it statement can appeal to the law or to an HR policy or to common sense. And it kind of shows where the boundary is between one person's freedom to believe whatever they want, but they can't impose that belief on you. So, for example, I was chit-chatting with a guy before a meeting, and he said to me, I had just had twins and I had just returned to work. I'll give you a little context. And this guy says to me, oh, my wife doesn't work because it's better for the kids. And of course, this is like a stab to my heart, but I don't think he really meant it the way it sounded. And I said, oh, I decided to show up at work today because I choose to neglect my children, and I expected him to react the way you just reacted, to laugh.
Laughing.
But he did not laugh. He doubled down. He's like, oh no, you don't understand, Kim. I have all this research that shows how terrible it is for your children that you're working.
Whoa.
Yes, that was so now I realize I'm not dealing with bias. I'm dealing with prejudice. I'm dealing with his belief. And so in this case, the company had hostile work environment policies. And so I said, it is an HR violation for you to tell me that I am neglecting my children by showing up at work today. And that had the desired impact. He was like, whoa. But of course I had to work with him, and I didn't want to over delegate to HR. So I said, look, I'm not gonna make a thing of this with HR, but I think you and I can agree that it is my decision, together with my partner, how we raise our children, just as it is your decision, together with your partner, how you raise your children. And furthermore, I'm guessing you don't want to read my research any more than I want to read your research. And so let's just agree that we're both raising our children in the way that works best for our respective families. And then he breathed a big sigh of relief. So that's using the HR policy. If you don't have the law, it is illegal too, or it is an HR violation too. If you don't have the law or an HR policy in your court, You can also just use common sense. Like, it is ridiculous for you to tell me how to raise my children. Stop. So that's the idea of an it statement. It's like, I'm not going to argue with you about what you believe, and because I don't want to have that conversation, and you probably don't want to have it either. But let's figure out a way to work together without you imposing your belief on me. And it was really important in this case that I said something to him, because he could have made determinations about which clients I was working with. And if he thought I shouldn't travel, then I was going to miss out on work opportunities that I wanted.
Yeah, very important to speak up for ourselves. And that's a smart way to do it. And so that leads us to bullying, which gives us permission to have you statements.
Yes. So, now you can whip out those you statements.
Now we can use them.
Yes. So I learned about the problem with I statements and bullying from my daughter. She was getting bullied. She was in 3rd grade. She was getting bullied on the playground. And I encouraged her to say to this kid, I feel sad when you blah, 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 blah. And she banged her fist on the table and she said, Mom, they are trying to make me feel sad. Why would I tell them they succeeded? And I was like, that is a really good point.
Wisdom.
Telling someone how you feel, telling someone who's bullying you how it makes you feel is not going to do any good, usually. And so we sort of started talking about you statements. You can't talk to me like that. Or what's going on for you? Why are you doing this? Or even a you non sequitur. Where'd you get that shirt? The point of the you statement is that you're no longer in the submissive role. You're not reacting to whatever this person threw at you. You're demanding that they answer your question or that they respond to you. So you're in a more active role, which is where you want to be with bully. But of course, the real problem was that my daughter's teacher was not creating consequences for bullying. So, there are things you can do as the person harmed. There are things you can do as the upstander, and there are things you can do as the leader. And especially in the case of bullying, and all of it. I mean, the purple flag, the sort of bias disruption demands some leadership. Consequences for bullying really demand some leadership as well.
Like what? What have you seen work, or does it just depend on the culture?
Well, I think there are always 3 consequences that leaders need to invoke in the case of bullying. Not all 3 all the time, but you need to consider all 3. The first is just conversational consequences. You cannot talk to your team members that way in this meeting, like step in. You can also pull the platform away from the person. If a person, you can turn off their microphone. You can walk towards them. It's interesting. When you walk towards someone who's bullying others, they tend to quiet down. And that's very helpful, especially if you're the leader. So you want to learn how to intervene sort of conversationally in the moment. You also want to create compensation consequences. You don't want to give high ratings and pay bonuses to people who bully others. There is a great rule at Atlassian, the no brilliant jerks rule, at the software company Atlassian. And in their performance management system, if someone got feedback that they had bullied others or been, harmed their colleagues, then they could not get a good rating no matter how good their performance was. Like you got to make sure that there are teeth to the behavioral expectations. And the third thing is career consequences. You want to make sure that you're not ever promoting someone who bullies others, because there comes a moment on every team's history when the jerks begin to win. And that's the moment when the culture begins to lose. And at a certain point, if you've given someone feedback that their behavior is unacceptable, that bullying is unacceptable on the team, and they cannot change that behavior, then you've got to fire them. think it's better to have a hole than an asshole. but that can be really hard because sometimes that person who bullies others is getting results. But you've got to have the discipline to realize as a leader that even though that individual is getting results, they're hurting the collective efforts of the team and doing more harm than good.
And how do you define, I know you define bullying as being mean, but what would be like tangible examples of that? Because I know some people use the word bullying when they mean something else.
Conflict.
Yeah, they mean conflict or they mean holding people accountable or something. But I know that you mean it very specifically.
Yes.
How do you mean it?
So it's really important. There's a lot of work that's been done on bullying, and I'll give you some good things for folks to read for the show notes. But the bullying tends to be repeated behavior, and the person doesn't change the behavior when they learn about the impact that the behavior has. And you know, there are times. Even I really would not consider myself as a bully, but I have bullied others. I think there are times when all of us have bullied other people. I'll give you an example. I find that I'm most prone to indulging the temptation to bully when I have a little bit of power in the situation and maybe a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. Right. And I don't think I'm alone in that. So there was one time when I was doing a podcast with Russ Laraway, who had been a colleague of mine for a long time, another person I like and respect enormously. He's a white man and a Marine, so he's sort of big and fit. And we were talking on the podcast about the power pose, and he made a comment about the power pose, which I wanted to dismiss. And I said, "Oh, Russ, you were born doing the power pose. Just shut up." You know, not my proudest moment. And I thought, and everyone else who was working on the podcast was a woman, and everyone just burst out laughing because we thought it was funny. But we were basically using his gender to silence him in a way that was just bullying. It was just mean. And I didn't realize what I was doing until one of our listeners stepped up as an upstander for Russ because he didn't say anything. I effectively silenced him. And one of our listeners wrote in and said, you know, "Kim, what was going on? That seemed like obnoxious aggression. That did not seem like radical candor." And I still didn't think I had done anything wrong. And I went to Russ and I said, "You didn't mind?" And he said, "I did mind, actually." It felt like, and so I guess, you know, I wasn't a bona fide bully because I did change my behavior, but I was resistant to hearing about it. So I was intentionally shutting him down. And using his gender, which he couldn't do anything about. In his case, he, you know, to shut him down. So, yeah, I was sort of ashamed of that, but we all do it sometimes.
For sure. And I think in that example, when the population is primarily like you or like the person conducting the bullying, and then there's laughter and all, like the opportunity to even purple flag that is probably pretty low. Yeah. The only person really who felt like it was an affront was Russ.
Yeah, who was in a minority of one in that situation. I mean, until the podcast went out, and then we had a more diverse set of listeners. And so I think it's really when you are in the majority, especially if you're in a super majority of any kind, be aware that it might be hard on people who are not in the majority, and be extra aware that you might be doing something that is, you might not intend to be bullying them, but the impact may be bullying.
For sure. And I think just as a generous leader, it is wise to be intentional about putting yourself in situations where you are the minority also. Yes. So you can feel what that feels like and practice some of these things and notice just, really how that feels and who is being an ally for you and or not. I just think it's important to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations in order to grow.
Yes, absolutely. And I think another thing leaders can do is when they have a particular point of view, they can argue, they can ask other people to argue for their point of view, and they can argue for another. They can switch roles if there's a debate on a team, because very often just your position as a leader has the impact of bullying, silencing others.
Absolutely. Right. If we do any diagnostic tools, I always take the leader's, whatever it is, style preference and put it in bold because it's like, we're going to compound this one because it's going to make more impact on this team. So just to complete the model here.
So the vertical line is you want to optimize for collaboration, not coercion. And bullying is kind of a form of coercion. So you want to make sure that you're addressing bullying and that you're creating consequences for bullying so that you don't wind up going down the slippery slope of coercion. And I think also you want to be aware, if you're a leader, of the impact that power has. Because when you layer power on top of bias and prejudice, you wind up with discrimination. And when you layer power on top of bullying, you get harassment. And when you layer power on top of physical touch, you get physical violations. And so that's what, and so this bias, prejudice, bullying, discrimination, harassment, and physical violations, that's what I call the taxonomy. And it's really useful. Like, as I'm talking about these different attitudes and behaviors in the book, there's a taxonomy at the bottom of every other page. And I've circled the one that I'm talking about because it's so easy to get disoriented when these things are happening. And trying to break this problem down into its component parts so we can get to that radically respectful workplace that we all long for is, I think, helpful. At least it was helpful for me in sort of analyzing the different things that happened to me in the course of my career. And the things that I did.
Yeah. And the things that you did, without intending to cause harm, but then receiving that radical candor feedback and doing something about it, right? And then telling others. That's one of the things I love about you is that you out yourself and then you say, here's what I could have done differently. And here's where this makes sense. So most of our listeners are generous leaders who are trying to create workplaces where people feel included and respected. For those who are listening, who are both that leader and somebody who has received this kind of treatment or is really personally resonating with some of the words that you're using, like harassment as an example, what are some of the recommendations you have for those people to get the help that they need?
I think that if any of these things are happening to you, especially if your boss is the person who is doing them or saying the things, it's really useful, first of all, to document what's happening. And you don't have to write some long document. Just like jot down the time and date and place and a brief description of what happened, and send it off to a friend or someone you trust. Not on your work email, on your personal. And the purpose, you can also keep a journal if you like to keep a journal, but the purpose of documenting is, even if you have no intention of using this documentation in a legal case or something like that, the purpose of documenting it is that it kind of dispels gaslighting. It's so easy to feel gaslit. And so it helps you remind yourself, like, this is not okay. This is not right. It's not me. It's them. So do that documentation. The second thing I recommend that you do is you build solidarity. You talk to other people, either at the company or in your private life, who can help, give you some ideas about how to deal with this stuff. Because again, you need to dispel gaslighting. It's easy to feel like you're all alone, that this only happens to you. Mm-hmm. And I promise you, you are not alone. This is happening to people all over the place. So build solidarity. And also, it's important because experiencing these things takes a real toll. It takes a toll mentally and it takes a toll physically. I read somewhere that there's a new study, and who knows, there's all kinds of different studies. So I'm not asserting this is absolutely true, but I kind of believe this, that who your manager is has a bigger impact on your physical health than your doctor. Like a bad manager can cause insomnia. It's a big deal, right? Mm-hmm. So build solidarity. Find people who you can get comfort from. And third, I recommend that you locate the exit nearest you, that you figure out, like, what are your exit options? Can you get another job? Can you survive for a few months on your savings? Can you sleep on someone's couch? Like, what can you afford to quit? And if you know that you can quit, don't forget to exercise that option. Should you need it. Don't forget to quit is some of the best career advice I ever got. But even if you're not going to quit, if you realize that you can, that can really help you go into a conversation from a stronger place. If you want to negotiate with your boss or talk to your boss about what's happening, you want to know what your BATNA is, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, right? Mm-hmm. It's very important because you can go in from a position of strength, knowing that I don't have to take this. I don't have to pay the asshole tax, actually. Mm-hmm. So then you can talk. You can try talking. Sometimes your manager has no idea the impact of their words or behaviors on you. And when you tell them, they'll be chagrined and they'll solve the problem. They'll knock it off. Mm-hmm. So that's number one. Try talking as long as you feel like somewhat safe doing it. You're never going to feel totally safe. I think also the benefit of locating the exit nearest you is that we often feel, at least for me in my career, I have often felt more trapped than I was. Mm-hmm. And so that realization, I don't have to put up with this is really important.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to attempt to recap what I heard you say.
Okay.
So that our listeners can just think about how can they practice this in their own work and lives. So this radical respect is the combination of a culture and an environment where there's collaboration and respecting individuality, really looking for opportunities, right, to celebrate and respect and recognize individuality. The things we have to be on the lookout for are bias, prejudice, and bullying. So the way that you say it about what upstanders can do in your book, there's the problem and then the response. So the problem to bias, or the problem is bias, and the response is using an I statement and inviting people in. If the problem is prejudice, we can use an it statement and show them where the fence is. And then if the problem is bullying, we can use you statements and push them away. And then the leadership here about having a shared vocabulary, creating shared norms, and then having a shared commitment is something so important.
Yes.
So thank you for giving us this practical wisdom and advice and really directional in how we can handle these very common workplace situations and how to be the kind of leader who is radically respectful.
Thank you. I know that's what we all want.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to R.O.G, Return on Generosity podcast. Please help us grow by subscribing and reviewing us on your favorite podcast player. And for more information, visit bridgebetween.com. We grow when we give.
우리는 나누면서 성숙합니다.
We grow when we give.
On rayonne quand on donne.
We grow when we give.